All right, we are live on YouTube and the recording is on. Let me make sure. The public line is with us and we are ready to start. Go ahead.
Great. Good morning. It's 9:02 and I would like to call to order the meeting of the Transportation Committee of Thursday, July 21st, 2022. Before we begin, please note this meeting is live streamed on YouTube and being recorded. Excuse me. Members of the public are encouraged to watch or listen to the meeting on YouTube, but if you would like to provide public comment at today's meeting, and if you haven't done so already, please call 415-569-6446 and let the facilitator know what items you would like to speak on today. Please bear with us as we move through today's meeting. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Thank you again. Good morning again, everyone. Starting with Director Maston.
Here.
Director Rabbit. Director Rabbit, we'll circle back to Director Rodoni.
Here.
Director Snyder.
Here.
Director Thier. Absent. Vice Chair Hill.
Here.
Chair Arnold.
Here.
And President Theriault is absent. Also on the line, we have Directors Cochran, Garbarino, and Parr. I believe those are all our directors there. So far we are not. Oh, there we go. And Director Hernandez. Hello there, Director Hernandez. So right now we are at 9. I will circle back if we become a committee of the whole, but currently we are a committee.
Thank you.
Let me confirm all the staff that's on the line. Let me double check. General Manager Dennis Mulligan is still here.
Good morning.
There we go. Joe Wyatt.
Here.
Thank you. Eva Bar Furbish. I see your lips moving, so I can see you're here. And I see your person. Kim Manolius.
Good morning.
Thank you. Dave Rivera.
Good morning, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mona Babauta. I don't see her on the line. Jim Swindler.
Present.
Thank you. Kelly Hopper.
Present.
Thank you. And I believe Madeline Chun is also on the line.
Yes, good morning.
Thank you. And Ron Downing.
Present.
Thank you. And Barbara Vincent, who's one of our presenters, is on the line as well. Great. Thank you. That confirms staff on the line.
Thank you. I would like to remind everyone to mute their microphones until after staff's presentation, and remember to unmute when we open up for directors' discussion. If we have directors calling in by phone, please use your mute button or *6 to unmute yourself. After staff's presentation, I will be asking for any questions or comments on the item. Click on reactions and raise hand on your computer if you have a question, or press *9 for the raise hand function if joining by phone. If there are any questions, the secretary or I will call on you accordingly. If you missed your raised hand, please speak up. After our discussion, we will ask for any public comment before moving on. Please follow along by referring to the page numbers located on the bottom right-hand corner of your meeting packet. Madam Secretary, please introduce the first item.
Thank you, Chair Arnold. We're going to start with agenda item number 3, and that's the report on, it's an informational report regarding the district's advisories committees. And that packet is in, let's see, I believe page 3 to 26 of your packet. I'm sorry. And staff is available to answer any questions directors may have.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from directors before regarding item 3? Yes, Director Parr.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't find my little hand button. I can't find it right now, but as I was reading through those, is it true that the Ferry Advisory Committee only had two members? Is that just something that's an anomaly for one week or one meeting?
It's a combination of an anomaly, and we are seeking additional members. So staff has done outreach for all the advisory committees, the ferry, the bus, the accessibility, and the new bicycle pedestrian advisory committee. And so they've done extensive outreach. And so we look forward to adding to the membership of the existing committees and launching the new committee in the coming months.
Do they generally, thank you, do they generally go through the writers? I mean, do they announce it to the writers?
Yeah, it's broadly disseminated through a variety of different channels, onboard buses and ferries, through social media, a lot of different channels. And it, historically for Ferry, it's been pretty robust, but as of late, there's been some, changes. People have changed their commute patterns or work patterns and the locations where they live. So we've seen some impact to some of the committees.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I don't see any. That concludes discussion on this item. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 3?
We have no speakers on this item.
All right, thank you. No action is required for item 3. Madam Secretary, please continue to the next item.
Thank you. We're going to move on to item number 4, and that's to adopt the Title VI equity analysis findings relative to the COVID-19 pandemic related adjustments to Golden Gate Ferry service. That staff report's found on page 27 of your packet. And principal planner, Barbara Vincent is here. Barbara, are you there? Barbara, you may have to unmute your device, but I see you here. Barbara? I was going to introduce Barbara to go ahead and start her report. But I don't know if she's having connectivity issues. Ron, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi there, Ron.
Good morning.
Good morning. So Barbara, if you do end up being able to connect and hear us, go ahead and unmute and chime in there. But for now, I'll have Ron Downing pick it up. Thanks, Ron. Go ahead.
Thank you, Amaret. The item before you today is to adopt the findings of a Title VI assessment for our ferry service reductions that were conducted during 2019. Title VI requires an assessment of the impacts on minority and low-income populations when a major service reduction is made, and our board-adopted policy indicates a 25% or greater threshold constitutes a major service reduction. The reductions that we did in 2019 due to the loss of riders, in the case of Ferry, did exceed that 25%. Specific to Golden Gate Ferry, the district anticipated restoring the eliminated service as demand returned and asked for guidance from FTA as to whether a Title VI analysis would be required, since we planned on putting a lot of that service back and would be under the 25% threshold. We had some back and forth with FTA, and ultimately they determined that we did need to do a Title VI analysis. So that's why this item is before you today. The technical analysis looked at the most recent survey data that we had for the ferry service. And that was a 2018 survey conducted by MTC, which was the last one done before the pandemic. We used that survey data to assess how the service reductions affect minority or low-income passengers. That's the cornerstone of the Title VI analysis. One thing we have to give a little bit more explanation to in the analysis is the 2018 survey data was capturing a lot of tourists on the Sausalito ferry route. And that kind of skewed the data in terms of people from outside of the region, outside of the United States, that had a greater percentage of minority or low income relative to the typical commute riders on the Sausalito ferry. So that data would normally identify the Sausalito route as a minority heavy route in our service. Those visitors did not come during the pandemic. they disappeared because of the stay in place orders and the restrictions on international travel. So any low income or minority travelers in the catchment area of the Sausalito Ferry had bus service that we maintained throughout the pandemic, with better access to that bus service, more frequent service, and lower fares. So indeed, any passengers who needed to travel from the catchment area for the Sausalito Ferry really had service available. They were not at a disadvantage relative to our reduction in service on the ferry routes. Thus, there was really no impact to minority or low-income passengers from the service reductions. So the equity analysis that's attached to the staff report indicates that these changes did not have a disparate impact on minority passengers, nor impose a disproportionate burden on low-income passengers. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions on the analysis.
Are there any questions? I can't see. Oh, there. All right. Any questions? Yes, Director Parr.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Ron, it's always thorough and well done. I appreciate that. When I read that it was the 2018 survey that we're basing it on, it was interesting because, you know, what we always say, I call it our folk legend, is that the service workers take our transportation into the city and back. And then all of a sudden we're cutting, I have it written down here, I hope I got it right, the 7:10 to 8:20 from Sausalito, which is not tourist, and the 5:45 p.m. to 10:05 p.m., which if people really are going into the city to work, those appear to be two of the routes that would be impacted. And my hunch is service workers that ride the ferry might be classified as low income. I noticed it's the low incomes level is $70,000, which is a lot of 75, which is a lot of money. Would you talk a little bit about that, about how we know that it's not a disparate impact on low income? I mean, I know you explained it, but talk just in real words about it.
So what we maintained on the Sausalito Ferry were those trips that would be during commute hours. During the pandemic, we had trips going across in the morning and returning in the evening for somebody that did have a work schedule in San Francisco. But as I also indicated, we maintained parallel bus service throughout the day, every hour, for somebody to still be able to get into San Francisco to work.
So what
And so
we
there's-
cut initially, if I may, we cut all weekend ferry service and we cut the midday ferry service. And we offered very, very limited, commute service, but we did maintain the commute out of Sausalito. We did not want to abandon any port during the pandemic. The reality is that trip operated as a triangle with Tiburon, and the reality is it had only a handful of people getting on in Sausalito, but we felt it was prudent to at least maintain, a commute trip so that customers would know that we're not leaving them. But the bulk of the ridership out of Sausalito into the city continued to be on our buses. The weekend and midday ferry service serves recreational trips and tourists. And in the early days of the pandemic, recreational travel stopped. People were scared to go outside, and tourists just recently started returning to Sausalito, and the ridership numbers are coming up. When we restored service, which this is based on, the restored service, today Sausalito has had more service restored than any other ferry route, just based on its robust ridership in terms of a percentage of what it was before and what it is today.
Okay, I have one other question, please, and I'm glad that Director Hernandez is on the call. I know that we have a fairly newly formed equity committee. Is this something that the equity committee takes a look at? I know that might be a new process, but is that important, or is it off to one side? I'll go on mute and have somebody in.
You know, what we're doing here is to comply with the federal regulation to keep funding flow. So we have to do a very prescriptive process per a federal regulation and FTA's interpretation of the regulation. And so this is just looking at the service we have today, the service we had before, and it's saying today's service is a new benchmark that will judge all future changes against. So we could separately talk about service changes with the equity committee, but the item before you today is to say, based on what we have today, we're resetting because FTA requires us to reset what is our baseline, and all service changes from the standpoint of FTA's criteria will be judged against that. But certainly if it's the board's pleasure, we could do a deep dive on what our service design is today and what our plans are to add service back with the equity committee, if that's the board's pleasure.
Perhaps if you would, I noticed that Director Hernandez just clicked in, but perhaps you could contact her and decide whether that's something that the board needs to weigh in on.
Okay. Is that it? All right, I see. Are you through, Director Parr?
Yes.
Okay, Director Hill, thank you. You're muted.
We've known for a while that service workers do a contra commute. In other words, we have a lot that come from San Francisco to work in Marin County. And I'm wondering if that was looked at in the process, instead of assuming they would go with the commute, they're actually on a contra commute, and is it as viable for them as others?
That's a great question, Director. The item before you deals with ferry service. On our bus system, before the pandemic, about half of our hours of bus service were what we call regional service, about 23 hours a day that's used primarily by service workers and folks who cannot own a car. The other half of our bus service hours before the pandemic were commuters. During the pandemic, even from the earliest days, we cut 90% of the commute bus service, which was used by commuters who tend to be affluent, white, office workers, but we maintained virtually all of our regional bus service during the pandemic, 23 hours a day, up and down the 101 corridor and across the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge corridor. So folks who don't have access to cars had the same mobility, or virtually the same mobility they had before the pandemic. So those workers were not impacted. The item before you deals with ferry. We really, to be candid, don't have service workers using our ferry system. The Sausalito statistical issue that arose in 2018 dealt with tourists who were below those income levels. And that's why we had the issue arise that it crossed a certain threshold that we had to dive deeper into and analyze, that Ron talked about. But with respect to our bus service, we kept half of our hours of bus service, virtually all of our regional service, to provide access and mobility to those communities who don't have choices.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the committee? Oh, yes, Director Hernandez.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So first, I wanted to say thank you to staff for putting together this report and for keeping us in compliance with requirements of the federal government. Of course, that is a huge priority for us, and the first thing that we need to think about. But there are other issues, I think, eloquently identified by my colleague Barbara Parr with regard to equity in the service that we provide and the client base that we have. I agree. Well, I had some similar concerns as stated by Director Parr, having to do with the approach to the analysis, the dates that were involved, the baselines, the previous baselines, and how, you know, it's a new world now, and how can we do an analysis based on information that really doesn't apply anymore. If I'm understanding things correctly, there's a lot of return to service relative to ferry, and it's actually a lot more robust than it was certainly during the pandemic, and that the new baseline will be this new higher level of service demand. So that is encouraging, and thank you, Ron, for helping us to understand that. But I do particularly appreciate Barbara Parr's comments with regard to the Equity Committee, the Equity and Diversity Committee. I think it is appropriate to have those discussions in the committee. As we all know, the committee has just recently concluded discussions on our first of three main topics, the first being how the district procures contracts. The next topic that we'll be discussing in the Diversity and Equity Committee will be a discussion on our practices as they relate to our employees. And then the third component that we have scheduled will be our practices as they relate to the community that we serve. So certainly in my mind, it feels appropriate to continue this discussion and have an opportunity for the folks on the Equity and Diversity Committee and the staff that is so dedicated to working on that with board members on that committee, and all of us in an effort to make the district a better place in terms of equity and diversity. Certainly is appropriate to have those discussions there, and I would request that stay on the table, that it be remembered when the appropriate time is for that topic to be addressed with the committee. Thank you very much.
So noted. Thank you, Director. Anyone else? I don't see any yellow hands. Okay, this concludes then the discussion on the item. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 4?
Yes, we have one speaker for public comment, and that's Mr. David Pilpel. David, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine. Thank you. Go ahead.
Great. Good morning, David Pilpel. So I support the proposed findings. My only other thought on this is that when there's a Title VI analysis relative to bus or ferry, I think that should be presented at the Bus Passengers Advisory Committee or the Ferry Passengers Advisory Committee, respectively, prior to bringing it before the board or committee. The staff report has a discussion about public outreach, but it's really the public outreach that occurred in 2013 related to the development of the district's Title VI process. There's really no discussion about public outreach about this particular Title VI analysis. I don't think it would change the analysis. I just think it's worth bringing that analysis on in a timely way to those advisory committees to see if there's any public comment there. There's not a whole lot of other meaningful outreach that I think you can do on this. I don't think it requires, some complicated public hearing or anything like that. But I think just bringing it to the advisory committee and seeing if there's any comment there is a step that's worth doing in the future. I had 3 other brief general public comments. I can do that at the end of this meeting, or I can do it now at the committee's pleasure. I'm trying to reduce the number of times that I talk to you.
Why don't we go ahead and take the vote, and then we'll come back for your other 3 issues, okay?
Sounds good. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, anyone else, Secretary?
We have no other speakers.
All right, thank you. So I will now entertain a motion on item 4.
So moved.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Thank you. We're still a committee, so we are not a committee of the whole. So I'm only going to be asking for a roll call with the committee members. So I'm going to start with Director Maston.
Aye.
Director Rabbit. Is absent. Director Rodoni.
Aye.
Director Snyder.
Aye.
Director Thier is absent. Vice Chair Hill
Yes.
and Chair Arnold.
Aye.
Thank you. We have President Terrio is absent today, so you have 5 ayes.
And so it passes, correct?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you, everyone. All right, Madam Secretary, please continue with the agenda.
Thank you. We're going to continue on to agenda item number 5, and that's the monthly report on bridge traffic transit ridership trends and transit service performance. That staff report begins on page 51, and Dennis is on the line with any questions directors may have, and he's here to present. Here you go.
Thanks. The written report's before you. The report, harkens from a different era when we didn't have a global pandemic slamming ridership and then slowly growing it back. So rolling 12-month averages are still somewhat limited in the data they show. The key thing to know is we continue to add back service as customers return. We add back bus and ferry service incrementally. And today, our average number of passengers per bus trip is 21, and our average number of passengers per ferry trip is 69. So, as we see growth in areas, we add service. Interestingly, though, the commute service in particular seems to be very Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday focused, what little we have. But with that, I'm available to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions? I don't see any hands. So thank you very much. We will, let's see what comes next. This concludes discussion on this item. And Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to discuss item 5?
We don't have a speaker on item 5, so what we'll do is we'll just finish out the rest of our agenda and we'll bring back Mr. Pilpel under public comment, okay?
Great, thank you. No action is required on this informational report. We will move on to item 6 for a monthly report on activities related to Marin Transit. Dennis, do you have anything to report related to item 6?
Yes, the Bridge District provides a portion of Marin Transit's local bus service under contract where they reimburse us. It's a longstanding relationship that is, been going on longer than perhaps a couple people on this meeting were alive. So I anticipate next month we'll bring an item forward. Nancy Wieland, the general manager for Marin Transit, and I have been active in negotiations, and I think we're done with the financial terms. We're just dotting a few I's and crossing a few T's. So I'm pleased to let you know that we'll have something coming before the board next month that will continue that relationship.
Thank you.
And I'm available to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? No, all right. Then this concludes the discussion on this item. Thank you, Dennis. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 6?
We have no speakers on item 6, so we'll bring back Mr. Pilpel to speak under item 7 for public comment. That's
All
okay
right.
with you. All right. Let me bring him back. Let's see. Justine. Hi there. David, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you fine. Thank you. Go ahead.
Excellent. So on public comment, first of all, on the last item, I am encouraged to hear that discussions have been productive with Nancy Whelan and Marin Transit, and look forward to further discussion and proposed agreement next month. That is great news. On a few other topics, I applied to serve on the new Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee this week, provided a letter of interest. Whether I am appointed or not appointed or disappointed, either way is fine, but I wanted the board to be aware that I did express my interest in that. Similarly, I wanted to thank Ron Downing for his continuing work and leadership on a variety of tough planning topics, whether it's Title VI or the Clipper Pass or the restoring bus service or all the other things that Ron does. I don't think I've called him out recently, but I wanted to do that publicly because Ron is great. I have also tried to reach Michael Abeg recently to discuss scheduling, and I've been unsuccessful there, but I will redouble my efforts. I had a couple of thoughts for him about reducing deadhead time in bus schedules and perhaps expanding span of service early morning and late night by reducing that deadhead time if there's a way to do it in a cost-effective manner. But I will follow up with him separately. Anyway, I just wanted to share those thoughts with the board and this committee relative to transportation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. I also wanted to thank Ron for stepping in and doing a good job with the item today. Thank you, Ron. We've reached the end of the agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you. Hearing no objections, this concludes the meeting of the Transportation Committee. Thank you, colleagues. The time is 9:32. Thank you.